Hi there, I'm Vincent Bos and I provide dating and self-improvement advice. And in today's podcast, we're going to be discussing how long it takes for your ex to move on. I provide audio coaching for breakup recovery, trying to get an ex back, attracting someone new, and life coaching. Visit www.dateme.tips for more details. Please check your spam and junk folders if you are expecting an email from me. Check out my socials for extra content. The links are in the description. So now let's get back into today's podcast. And today we are discussing how long it takes for your ex to move on. So if you have been dumped and want to try to get your ex back, you will likely wonder when they will move on from you. In today's podcast, I'll be discussing 3 points to consider about how long it likely takes for your ex to move on. So let's get straight into this, and point number 1 is length and depth. So when I'm speaking about length and depth, I'm speaking, of course, about the relationship that you had with your former partner. So let's look at that first sub-point now. When we consider length, it's really important to categorize how long your relationship with your former partner was. Now, of course, there is no one-size-fits-all strategy here. There is no concept which is going to be exactly correct, but we can look in a generalized sense. So let's say, for instance, that you and your now former partner were together for just 2 or 3 months. Now, if you were together for 2 or 3 months, the likelihood is there's going to have been very little depth to your relationship, but not necessarily. Sometimes people can have a real whirlwind connection, which throws a lot of things into the mix, even though it wasn't for that long. If you had a relationship which was very short and also didn't really have much depth, the likelihood is that your ex-dumper will unfortunately be able to move on much sooner than you would probably like to think. So if we were to consider you and your ex dated for 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks, and if you're honest with yourself, there was no real deep connection built, well, the likelihood is that your ex-dumper could be quote-unquote moving on within a matter of weeks post-breakup, because they didn't really see your situation as being anything more than going on a few dates. Now, you might have seen it as more than that, and again, there is no guarantee that what I'm saying is going to link precisely with your situation, but if what I've just described matches what you and your ex's relationship was like, we have to be honest, it wasn't much more than dating, casual dating. And sometimes people will be dating multiple people off dating apps for this type of length of time to see which connection fits best. So there could be a scenario where your ex-dumper has continued to date. Again, I'm not trying to say that has happened, but we have to be honest. Now, if there was a bit of depth to your connection, then I would still suggest that if it was a very short period of time that you were dating, they may move on still relatively quickly. The difference being is that if there was a little bit more depth to this short-term relationship, well, there is an opportunity that further down the line, you are still going to cross their mind and drop into their thoughts via triggers, memories, and things which were created between you, which were possibly unique and probably quite powerful for the length of time you were together. So now let's consider if you were dating for something along the lines of 9 to 12 months. So this is obviously much more significant than if it was a couple of months or so, but still it's not something which is beyond a year. What would happen in this situation? Well, if you've been dating near on a year, around a year, then this means that you probably had at least 1 day off a year together throughout the whole calendar. And this is very, very important because it means there is a trigger on every potential day of the year. Maybe you didn't quite cross that year mark, but you probably still went by some major moments, whether it is your ex's birthday, your birthday, Christmas, New Year's Eve. These are the days which naturally we think back upon to think, what did we do last year on those special days? Now, if you were with your ex on those days, then this means that you were going to be sticking around in their mind much longer. Now, if there was a real depth to the connection that you had, this could mean that your dumper is going to find it very hard indeed to move on anytime soon. Even though your relationship didn't last really beyond a year, there could still be a lot of difficulty in them moving on if there was depth and all of these days of the year which have been ticked by, you could say. Now, perhaps you were together for around 9-10 months, but again, if you're honest with yourself, there wasn't really the depth. Maybe it was a relationship of convenience, and maybe if you really consider everything, you never had a stronger bond as you would have liked. Maybe you can recognize that. Well, once again, if we compare the length and the depth of your relationship, and if it doesn't quite have that depth, then they're going to be more likely to be able to move on sooner than if they have the depth. I would say in this instance, it would probably still mean they're going to be out of the dating game in any serious way, certainly for a few months. But if there was depth, if there was a relationship around a year or so, they could be finding it difficult to move on within that first year post-breakup. Now, this doesn't mean they might not go on a date, but they're going to find it difficult to find that connection. Now, how about if you and your dumper were dating, or maybe even more so, maybe you were living together, maybe you were married, maybe you had children, maybe you were together for many, many years. What does this mean? Well, if that is the case, we can almost say for certain that the length of your relationship goes hand in hand with a deep level of depth. For you to get to that point, there must have been those moments along the way. And in this regard, I can say with some degree of certainty that your ex is definitely going to find it difficult to move on before a year. Certainly, I would say it's much more likely to be 1, 2, 3 years rather than 1, 2, 3 months. The reason for this is we're just quantifying what we've spoke about already. There are more triggers, there are more memories, there are more things which are going to pull your ex-dumper into thinking about you and finding it much harder to build a new connection with anyone new. It doesn't mean they can't go on dates with other people. We see rebound relationships where people make connections in that first year post-breakup, but these relationships tend to burn out almost as quickly as the two people got together. There is no real connection there. They're just trying to chase something that they feel they're missing, and yet when they do finally get to know one another, they realise it's very hard to find a long-term compatible partner. And hence, when we consider the length and depth of your relationship with your ex, we can have some level of prediction about how hard or easy, in some instances, they might find it to move on. Ultimately, the longer your relationship, the deeper your relationship, the more tricky they're going to find to move on. And in some instances, if you've been together many, many years, it could be many, many years before they are able to take a real step away from you. So now let's get into point number 2 and the second point of today's podcast. Please like this video if you're watching on YouTube. And if you have the new hype feature, please hype this video as well. If you like my content, subscribe to the channel to keep updated. And point number 2 is that it's likely to be longer than a year. Now this is adding on to what we spoke about in point number 1. As you could see from what I was discussing there, most of the time I would be believing that your ex-dumper is going to find it difficult to move on before a year. So even if you were together for a fairly short period of time, you would have seen what I was saying. The likelihood is we're going to be considering it being a year or more. And this is really, really important to get your head around, because if you have been dumped, you might be checking your ex's social media, you might be looking at the calendar, you might be checking your phone almost constantly, trying to find clues that your ex has moved on. And if you believe they have moved on, that is going to put you into a negative spiral and ultimately make it much more difficult for you to potentially get your ex back. And that's why I wanted to focus in point number 2. The likelihood is going to be a year or more. Most of the time, most of the instances, is it's going to be very hard for your ex-dumper to move on before a year. And often, it's well beyond a year. 1, 2, 3, 4 years. So this is what I would say to you, dumpies. Try not to worry. And I know that's hard for you to do right now. I know you are worrying, I know you are panicking, and it is important to say that we can't guarantee your ex-bedumper is not going to move on for this length of time, but I would say statistically it is going to be beyond a year, often much longer than a year. And the reason why you need to stay as calm as possible is because if you don't, you're going to make mistakes. If you feel the anxiety, you are likely to make anxious errors. And if you do this, this is probably going to involve you stalking your ex in some way, whether it's online or even worse in person, reaching out to your ex for reasons you really shouldn't be doing, or behaving in a way which is needy, desperate, and ultimately unattractive. If your aim is to get your ex back, you need to be growing your value. You need to be becoming the type of person that they want to be with, the type of person that they feel an increase of attraction towards, not a feeling that they want to run away from you, not a feeling that they need to call the authorities onto you because you're creeping them out. You can't be behaving in this way, and that's why it's so important to hammer home the point that you must stay calm. At the end of the day, there is nothing you can do to persuade somebody who doesn't want to be with you. If you are trying to persuade somebody, or goodness, force somebody, not only is that wrong on every level and ultimately illegal, but it's not something that you would really enjoy. Having somebody with you via persuasion or goodness force? Is that really what you want? No, you want them to be with you because they want to be with you. So you have no option but to stay calm, work on yourself, don't behave in a creepy way, don't be needy or desperate, don't be negative, because if you are, you're going to be pushing your ex further away. You're not going to be enticing them back to you by behaving in those negative examples that I've just given. So remember, it's likely to be at least a year or more in most instances before your dumper may move on. So use this time instead to focus on you, go through self-improvement, and get through breakup recovery. Now, if you would like advice and support about how to try and increase the chance of one day getting your ex back, then you may want to consider my audio coaching service, where me and you can speak one-on-one about your unique specific situation. Go to my website www.dateme.tips for more information about how I can become your coach and your teammate via my audio coaching service. Talking about your feelings can also improve your mental health. It helps prevent the buildup of negative emotions, which can lead to stress, anxiety, depression, and even physical health issues. Speak your heart to free your mind. So now let's get into point number 3 and the final point of today's podcast. If you feel that this podcast has helped you, then please consider buying me a coffee. The link to do so is in the description. And point number 3 is, does anyone ever really do this? So when I'm saying, does anybody ever really do this, I'm talking about, does anybody ever really move on? And this is a really powerful question, because when we ask the question, when is my ex going to move on? It's that thought that if and when we say they have moved on, if and when we definitively give them that label, oh, my dumper has moved on, it's the thought that they've gone forevermore. The door is locked, is bolted, and the key has been thrown away. But does this ever really happen? Now, in ultra extreme instances, you could argue that it does. But I've heard of many situations, some of which would seem very unlikely that an ex would come back, and yet they still have. More than once have I heard dumpers return after more than 5 years. More than 5 years! Now, don't get me wrong, the odds of you getting your ex back post a year, from what I have seen, does start to lessen. But it doesn't extinguish altogether. Now, I'm not trying to give you false hope. I'm not trying to tell you to wait around. But as we can see, we never really know when the story ends. How do we really know when someone has moved on? Feelings are felt in the moment. They loved you once, sadly they don't right now, but in the future, who knows? Similarly, your feelings to your ex could alter as well. You feel a real strong pull right now, but does that mean you'll feel that way in 9 to 12 months? Nobody knows for certain. So that question again, do we ever really move on? Does it ever really happen? I would suggest that you will always be in your ex's life story and they will always be in yours. And what this shows is that there will always be that link. There will always be that connection. There will always be triggers, even if the amount of triggers was not as many as you would hope. Even though over time they have less strength, they are still there. Memories, triggers, experiences. You were together in a relationship. You were connected. And what this means is that one day in the future, they might just start to miss you. Now, if you live in the USA and want to support my channel, please consider shopping at Calvin Klein using the affiliate link in the description. Calvin Klein is a fantastic brand to help both men and women look great and feel confident. As a Calvin Klein affiliate, I may earn a commission if you make a purchase at no extra cost to you. Thank you for your support.